So, you've heard of the stories Cinderella and various other tales that involve evil stepfamilies planning to get rid of the children so they can have all the money, power, and glory to themselves? Well, this is basically that, only much darker, while also dealing with the full load of karma for the evil stepfamily in this case. Now, in all seriousness, I am not opposed to actual stepfamilies, as I understand that the negative stereotypes that decent stepfamilies unfortunately go through happen because of these kinds of tales and stories, but let's just view this as a cautionary tale as to what happens when a stepfamily's wicked actions come back to bite them in the worst way possible. Now, this is an old Korean folk tale that I came across due to my curiosity, prompting me to wander the internet or any decent Korean folk tale that I could find, because well, I am Korean myself, and I wanted to find some kind of decent, I guess, representation in a way. But anyway, from what I researched, it was told, or at least this particular story was told during the Joseon era and continued to be a popular folk tale even to the present day. Funny thing is, I only heard about it thanks to a movie called The Uninvited, which was a Western adaptation of the Korean movie A Tale of Two Sisters, which in turn is one of the many adaptations of the old folk tale that I'm about to tell you called Janghwa and Hongryeo, which literally means the story of Janghwa and Hongryeo. Now, the story itself can be best described as a Brothers Grimm level fairy tale involving like supernatural horror elements along with bits of tragedy due to the contents of the story, especially around the first half. Though like most of the time it's considered a ghost story, though unlike most of the ghost stories that you'd hear, which usually has tragic or sad endings, this one actually has a happy ending, albeit in a very bittersweet sort of way, which we explain like near the end. Now, for those of you who are very squeamish and sensitive to certain topics like suicide, blood, and violence, then this is probably not the story for you, and it's best that you do not listen or watch any further. Like, this is your only warning, okay? Okay? Okay, then, here we go. Now, our story begins with a humble man named Muryong, whose wife had a dream given to her by an angel or divine spirit of some kind, who handed her a beautiful flower and nothing more. And 10 months later, she would end up giving birth to her firstborn daughter, Janghwa, whose name meant rose flower, which I'm going to assume is a reference to the flower from the mother's dream. 2 years later, the couple would end up having a second daughter named Hongryeo, whose name means red lotus. And as you can see, the names have a sort of flower pattern, like especially one that's related to both the rose and the lotus. Well, the funny thing is, my name, along with my sister's Korean name, so I'm not gonna say it for privacy reasons. Like, we're both actually named after flowers ourselves. Though what our names are, I can't tell you. And now back to the story. And you think that everything would be okay for them, even if the family kind of expected to have sons, because at the time sons were usually seen as the inheritors or the main heirs to certain families, both rich and poor. But nonetheless, they're shown to be a happy family, and it seems like all would be well and dandy for them, right? Wrong. Like with many folk tales and fairy tales, the mother tragically passes away when Hongryeo, who's the younger sister, turns 5 years old, thus forcing Muryong to marry an ugly shrew of a woman who proceeds to abuse the daughters in every way possible, hence why the evil stepmother trope comes in. Though in this case, like in the unique twist to the usual step-sibling scenario, which are mostly stepsisters, like, this version of the stepmother has sons who end up serving as the stepbrothers to Janghwa and Hongryeo. Like, though she only had them after marrying Muryong, though how he was able to conceive children with someone like her is anyone's guess. Now, you'd think that they, or at least the stepbrothers, wouldn't be as bad as their mother, right? But, unfortunately, as you probably could tell by now, they are just as rotten as their mother, though whether they were born like that or their mother just spoiled them is anyone's guess. Though personally, I like to believe it's a bit of both. But in this case, like I mentioned before, the stepmother gives birth to at least 3 sons who end up being not only the stepbrothers to Janghwa and Hongryeo, but they're also her half-brothers. But unfortunately, the stepbrothers also proceed to abuse and hurt the like the two sisters who were very close with each other and were the daughters of the first mother. Now you're probably wondering, why didn't Janghwa and Hongryeo simply tell their father or anyone like near their home that they were being abused by their step family? Well, as you can see, due to them being the prominent examples of what some would call the dutiful daughters, they couldn't tell anyone without worrying their father and breaking apart their new family, even if they wanted to. And as a result, although while some could believe that Muryong knew about it but was just in severe denial and chose to be a bystander, but I personally believe that Muryong genuinely had no idea and that he was happy to have had a new wife and sons, even if he was very, very much unaware of what kind of people they really were. And not to mention, like I mentioned before, the fact that Changhwa and Hongryeo were both girls, like thus making them somewhat ineligible for inheritance of some kind, would make it more complicated. And as a result, like at least in this time period, it was most likely that the brothers or half brothers would have ended up gaining all the riches and wealth or inheritance of some kind from their father or even their mother. Which unfortunately doesn't make things any better. But oh, thank goodness, Changhwa finally comes of age and is able to get married to the man of her dreams. Now, you might be thinking, will she get her happy ending and finally leave the wretched family that's tormented her and her sister for years? No. Sadly, it turns out her stepmother just has to ruin her one chance of happiness, all because she's too greedy to even consider paying for the upcoming wedding ceremony, right? Despite the fact that Changhua wouldn't even be around anymore, right? Because apparently she's too greedy to even consider like helping her stepdaughter just this once. And not only that, like it's heavily implied that she's merely trying to keep the money all for herself and to a lesser extent her sons, but mostly for herself. Wow, gee, Mother of the Year, everyone! You know, it's women like you are the reason why stepmothers and stepparents get a bad rep these days. As if the stepmother wasn't evil enough, she decides to ruin Changhwa's life by having her sons frame Changhwa for supposedly having a child out of wedlock, and by doing that, they literally just stick a dead rat in her bed after skinning it, thus leaving a bloody mess and making it look like Changhwa had a miscarriage of some kind. Unfortunately, because, as I said before, Changhwa and Hongryeo never told their father about what their stepmother was doing to her, he unfortunately believes the stepmother's accusation and basically disowns Changhwa. Understandably upset over the whole debacle, Changhua ends up running out of the house to the nearby woods, where she grieves at a pond that unfortunately proves to be her resting place thanks to the stepmother. As if the stepmother didn't show just how depraved she was by framing her own daughter for supposedly being a harlot in the eyes of both her father and the people, she decides to get rid of her daughter once and for all by having one of her sons push Changhua into the pond, thus drowning her in the process and cementing both her and her sons as the worst step family ever. However, in what could be best described as a late Deus ex machina or divine intervention, the son that kills Changhua, or rather murders Changhua, immediately gets killed by a tiger who decides to take one of his arms and legs, thus causing him to bleed to death. Whether the tiger just happened to be waiting for someone to invade its territory or sought to punish him for his actions is anyone's guess, though I personally believe it could be the latter. As they all say, karma is a bitch. Though, sadly, it came at the cost of Janghwa, so what can you do? As for Hongryeo, the surviving sister, her life ends up turning even worse as she not only loses her birth mother, but her sister as well. Especially since the story kind of states, or at least hints at how close Changhwa and Hongryeo were before Changhwa's death. And as for the stepmother, the moment she finds out about her son's death right after he murdered Changhwa, she basically goes mental and decides to take her anger on Hongryeo as she comes to the insane belief that the younger daughter was somehow responsible for her half-brother's death. Though I'll be completely honest, even if Hongryeo actually did kill her brother, or half-brother in this case, but after what he did to Changhua, I would not blame her a single bit. I mean, I probably would have done the same thing if someone murdered my sister. Maybe. Probably. Who knows? Anyways, the abuse continues to affect Hongryeo, whereas her father remains blissfully unaware of just how horrible his second wife and stepsons are, which gives the question as to whether he's just a severe denial of the situation at this point. But eventually and tragically, Hongryeo decides to put herself out of her own misery and join her sister by willingly drowning herself with no one there to witness her or even save her from her fate. Her body was said to have been found eventually by the locals, but at that point, it was too late. And one can only imagine how her father Muryong must have felt after finding out that he lost both of his original children and is now stuck with two horrible sons and an evil stepmother or a second wife who unfortunately got away with literal murder. Like, I mean, given how completely oblivious he was, I guess it's safe to say that he never really found out the circumstances behind his daughter's death. Now, in any other story, especially one that has so many tragedies laced together within the plot, like this would be how it ends. However, this is not that kind of story, as it continues sometime after the deaths of both Janghwa and Hongryeo. Our story then shifts to our new protagonist, the mayor himself. So, yeah, we basically have a politician as our hero of the day. What fun! Thankfully, however, this guy proves to be far more competent than you'd think, as he is able to help avenge the two daughters who died tragically. Let me explain. You see, ever since the deaths of Janghwa and Hongryeo, a curse had fallen upon the village that the two girls once lived in. The mayors of the village ended up getting killed the day after they arrived and were elected to lead the people. Nobody knew why this was happening until our plucky, courageous protagonist ends up becoming the new mayor himself and sets out to stop the curse once and for all. He proceeds to wait at night on the day after he has been elected with only a candle to provide light for him in his room. Suddenly, creepy things start to occur, like his candle being blown out, along with terrifying sounds and screams being heard throughout the room. So, yeah, this is basically where the supernatural horror part comes in. Finally, after his door gets swung open without anyone there, and the room starts to smell eerily like moss, like the kind that you would see at a pond. Like, see, notice the dots being connected? Well, anyways, the mayor finally meets the ghosts of Janghwa and Hongryeo, who, surprise, surprise, had become vengeful spirits who wished to clear their name, or rather, Janghwa's name, over supposedly having a child out of wedlock and being seen as a whore as a result. Hongryeo is the one who was most adamant in bringing justice to Janghwa, as she also wished to punish her sister's murderers after they got away scot-free. When the mayor asks him on who did it or what he could do to end the curse they placed in the village, the sisters merely tell him to examine the so-called dead fetus that their stepmother claimed was Janghwa's illegitimate child. Alright, so yeah, they basically give him cryptic advice, but in a way, this actually helps, as the mayor is able to connect the dots and realize that something terrible has indeed happened in the village. So anyway, the mayor quickly summons the step-family and Muryong to inspect the fetus and finds out that the girls were indeed telling the truth about the step-family's crimes, about how they not only lied about what happened to Janghwa, but they also basically murdered Janghwa herself while indirectly leading Hongryeo to kill herself. So not only do the step-family have to deal with having indirectly caused the whole village to be cursed, but they are now branded as murderers and abusers, which they rightfully deserve in this case. Muryong, who was the oblivious father, is spared by the mayor, as the mayor believes that he was completely innocent, had no idea about the pain and suffering his daughters went through because of his new wife and sons. Though, given how Hongryeo and Janghwa never told him, so of course, it would make sense that the mayor would see that Muryong was relatively innocent, though Muryong will now have to deal with the guilt of having indirectly killed his own daughters because of his neglect and obliviousness. So, for those who think he should have been punished, personally, I think he's been punished enough. As a result, the step family finally gets executed, whereas Muryong is the only survivor, and as a result, the curse is finally lifted from the village, with the mayor being able to live to see another day and bring justice upon anyone who tries to cause trouble within the village again. As for Muryong, he ends up remarrying a much better and nicer woman, as his third wife, now that his horrible excuse of a previous wife, is gone, along with his sons. But given that they ruined the lives of his daughters and lied to him about practically everything, I doubt he even mourned for them very long. Moon-young ends up having a dream of his own on his wedding night, only to see the ghosts of his daughters who have forgiven him for his neglect and ignorance. The dream ends with them stating that they miss him very much and wish to be with him again. 9 months later, his third wife ends up giving birth to twins who are named Janghwa and Hongryeo in honor of his first daughters, though it's never outright stated, but it's heavily implied that they are indeed the reincarnations of his first daughters who were able to be with their father again, along with having brought their tormentors and murderers to justice. So, yeah, it's a surprisingly happy ending for them, though the bittersweet part comes from the fact that they had to die in order for them to have a happy ending. But hey, at least, like, reincarnation works in this case. So, what's the lesson we can get from this? Never abuse the children of your significant other, as your actions will come back to haunt you. In this case, literally. At the same time, I can't help but feel pity for Moon-young. I mean, the guy lost his first wife, and when it seems that he finally finds happiness in the form of a second wife, he's unable to stop her from abusing his daughters, thanks to her deceptive nature, all of his daughters not wanting to speak up out of fear of ruining him. And then, he's told that his firstborn daughter had a child of wedlock, only to die moments later at the hands of an unknown assailant, who ends up being his own son, mind you. Even worse, he finds out later that everything his second wife told him was a lie, as she not only had his firstborn daughter murdered for money, but she also drove his second daughter to suicide, while also corrupting his sons into being her personal henchmen, and thus murders in their own right. I mean, under her, like, what else did his sons potentially do that was so horrible other than murdering their half-sister? But needless to say, this would definitely be very traumatizing. And to top it all off, his second wife and sons are basically the ones who cursed the entire village by turning his daughters into vengeful spirits. I mean, come on, give this poor guy a break. I mean, sure, his main crimes were his ignorance and naivety, but even I wouldn't wish for someone like him to be put through all that. Thankfully, he's able to find some solace and a happy ending of his own by remarrying an actual good woman who loves him for who he is, and he even gets his daughters back in the form of twins. So, all's well that ends well, I guess.